You ever read a really great movie or television review? Like maybe it's an epic takedown and it's just delicious to read. Or maybe it unlocks something, changes how you see the whole series. I know I have. In fact, when I was a teenager, I used to read New York Times movie reviews just for fun. Yeah, I was a nerd. And I didn't even care if the critics thought the movies were good or bad. I just loved reading their beautifully crafted essays. And even though there I was as a teen reading the paper of record for fun, the thought back then never crossed my mind that I could be one of them. And I think the reason why is because the numbers, they go something like this. White guys write about 2/3 of movie reviews, despite making up just 30% of the population. While way on the other side, Black women, Asian women, Indigenous women, and Latinas like me, together, we write just 4% of movie reviews, despite making up 20% of the population. And look at me. I'm Latina because 2 of my grandparents were Mexican, but I'm mixed. I have white skin and green eyes, and I'm taking up space in that 4%. So you know how much harder it is for women who are racialized when they walk into the newsroom. And that disparity, it sucks. It sucks for a lot of reasons, but one of them is just taking away that pleasure of reading a really great review. In fact, it tees up stupid reviews. One that comes to mind is around Dora and the Lost City of Gold. You remember Dora the Explorer, the beloved childhood character? Yeah. She got a live action film and her and her friends were played by teenagers, and it could have been this great moment to talk about Latino representation or the significance of this character. But instead, we were talking about this review that came out in the Hollywood Reporter, where the critic there, he dinged the film because he didn't find teenage Dora sexy enough. Yeah, I'm telling you, there's no reason for that to have been published. Because those underrepresented critics, the ones who understand the ways that our communities have been hypersexualized and all the problems that go with it, we are ready. We have the skills, we have the experience, and we have the passion. And we are banging at the door saying, let us in. I know, I write for Roger Ebert. And I'm proud to write for a publication that, yes, was founded by a white guy, but a white guy who understood movies to be what he called empathy machines. Isn't that powerful? Don't you want your empathy machine to be stronger? Wouldn't that make us all better humans regardless of our identities? I think so. And I think movies can do that. They can help us change how we see ourselves and our position in the world, and they can help us build bridges to others and have really meaningful conversations that can create change. But that only works if everybody has a voice. And that's not happening everywhere. You know, I know that Chaz Ebert is making sure that RogerEbert.com is one of those places. But that's not happening industry-wide, and it's not happening society-wide, and that's how come we get that huge disparity. And another reason that disparity sucks is because it sends a damaging message. It sends a message that only certain people's voices matter, only certain people get to define quality, and only certain people get to set our cultural narrative. And I know that that message is damaging because I received it. When I was a little girl, I wanted to be a writer. And not for a week or a month or a year, but for my entire childhood. We have all these old journals that I filled up with stories, and I can barely make letters, and I'm trying to tell stories. And every time we went to a new place, I would imagine it as a setting for something that was just bursting out of me to tell. But sometime around puberty, around when our friend at the Hollywood Reporter would have said my sexuality was throbbing just beneath, I told myself that nothing I could write would ever be good enough, so I should give up. And I did. I stopped writing. I stopped writing for myself. But I still loved stories, and I was young, and I had this social justice orientation, so I went on to be an English major in college, and I wrote a lot, and I had a whole career in nonprofits, and I was writing grants and blogs and newsletters. And around that time, I found my way to an organization that works on gender representation in media. And while I was there, I learned to articulate this thing that I'd known in my bones, which is that stories really do matter. They say that culture precedes politics, and I think that that's true. I think if you want to change the world, you have to start by changing how people think about the world. You have to start by changing their hearts and minds. You have to start by changing the narratives that we tell ourselves. And whether we like it or not, movies and TV, they are our big cultural artifacts. They're the things that we gather around, that we discuss, that we try to make meaning out of. And if we want this world to be for everybody, everybody has to have a chance to tell those stories and to evaluate them. Thank you. Yeah, so I learned how to articulate that. And I also learned that change is possible. That when we organize and agitate and find common cause, that we can move the needle. I saw it happening, I was a part of it, it was inspiring. But I also noticed something else. I noticed that my community's needs, Latino, Latinx's needs, they never seemed to make the priority list. And it wasn't because well-intentioned activists didn't want to bring us with them. And it wasn't because Latinos don't make up a big enough of the market share for us to matter. That's not true either. According to the Latino Donor Collaborative, if we were our own country, it would be the 5th largest in the world. Latinos here in the US. And you know what else? We spend our money on media. We love movies and television. We're just 20% of the population, but we buy 30% of box office ticket sales and 27% of streaming subscriptions. And that's despite making like 3 to 10% of leading roles, depending on the year. Yeah, we want this content. We are ready for it. So why aren't we getting it? Well, I think part of it is that Latinos are just a really diverse group. You know, here in the US, we may be united by some common history, sometimes common language, common culture, but you can be Latino and Black or white or Asian or indigenous. You can speak any language, you can have any sexual orientation, you can come from any socioeconomic status. And we want to see all of that represented on screen. And that's just not possible when you're only getting like 5% of leading roles. And so when I looked at all of that and I looked back, I realized something. I realized that I'd listened to the wrong set of messages. And I stand here before you today, not as self-made, but as community-made. Because I threw out the message that said, little Cristina, you can't do very much on your own, so you shouldn't try. And instead, I listened to my community. I listened to my parents, who had always led by example, and taught me how to be a fierce advocate and critical thinker. I listened to my friends and family and colleagues who had nurtured me and helped me grow and held me accountable when I made mistakes. I listened to the feeling in my heart when I look at my children and I think about the world I want them to inherit. I listened to the support from my spouse. And when I did that, I realized that my voice does matter, and that I can make a difference, and that I can build something amazing in community. So what did I do? I linked up with another Latina, Nicholas Schultz, who I was working with at the time, and we started talking. What could we do? And we noticed something. We noticed that there were a lot of really great groups working on making sure that the people who are in front and behind the camera, that they're representative of society at large. But there wasn't as much happening on the third rail of the Hollywood ecosystem, which is critics. And there was nothing happening for Latinas and Femme Latinxes. And we said, we know how to write, we know how to analyze, we're organizers, we're marketers, what can we do? And so together we created Latina Media Co. Yeah. And it started off just as an experiment. Nicola and I, writing for the site, editing each other's work, putting it out there. We wanted to know, did we have something to say? Would anybody listen? And the answers really turned out to be yes. And the more we did it, the more we grew, and we started to attract attention, and we started to attract dollars. And now we have this really beautiful community of Latina and Femme Latinx critics who take their bylines with us and go have whole careers edging out that 4%. And you know what else? They network with each other because they're a real community. We have folks who are in undergrad and folks with decades of experience. And they're talking to each other, they're reading each other's work, they're helping each other level up in their careers. We have 2 who are working on a book deal together. Like, cool stuff is happening. And the more we publish, the bigger our audience gets. Because Latinos, those media consumers, they want to read this stuff. They want to read critics who know what it is to be Chicana or Boricua or Salvi and run with it, that write from that perspective, that understand and can move. And that's what we're doing. We're doing it for my community, and it makes me so, so proud. But we're not the only ones. There are other great groups who are doing it for their communities. I really like Black Girl Nerds, if you want another example. And even though we're doing it, we're building our own institutions, we're not waiting for anybody's permission, I'm here to call on you. I'm here to call on you, the audience's help. If we're going to truly change the face of film criticism, and from there change the world, I need you. But don't worry, I figured out an easy 3-step plan for you to join me. Ready? Yeah. So step 1, you got to start by paying just a little bit more attention. When you're reading something, look at that byline. Whose name is it? Whose photo is on there? Chances are, statistically, 2/3 of the time, it's a white guy. And now I want you to think about what it's been like to read white guys 2/3 of the time your entire life. An example that comes to mind is Scandal. You remember the Shonda Rhimes show starring Kerry Washington? Yeah, I loved this show. She plays this high-powered DC fixer. Well, when the show first came out, the critic at Variety, he wrote that he thought Kerry Washington, while beautiful, lacked the gravitas to play that role. That makes my blood boil. Because it is so outside of my experience watching that show, and frankly, outside of the experience of everyone I know. And there it was being presented in this well-known paper as objective truth. But it's not, right? It's one person's bias, one person's, frankly, blind spot. And now that you know what you've just learned about criticism, you can say, not truth. I'm going to go read something else. There's someone else's perspective that is more interesting, more pertinent, and better for me to read. So go do that. That gets us to step 2, which is to change your diet. Go out and seek women critics, people of color critics, Latino, Latinx critics, and follow the ones you like. You're not going to like everybody, because that's a really diverse group. It's more than half the population, right? But when you do find the ones that you like, support them. And once you've done that, once you've made that individualistic change, it's time for step 3, which is systemic change. And that's where I think the really good stuff happens, because there's nothing wrong with being born a white guy and wanting to become a television critic. I think aspiring to any sort of arts criticism is pretty cool. The problem is making that voice twice as loud at the expense of everybody else. And so how do we do that? How do we change that pattern? Well, we have to work in community. So go out and find the organizations who are working at it and figure out how to join. I'm a part of the Latino Entertainment Journalists Association. You can check us out. Or look at the National Association of Black Journalists. They're doing really cool stuff. Figure out how you can join organizations like that. Find the local ones in your community and support them. Figure out how you can be part of their campaigns and their mission. And I truly believe that if we do that, if we all do that, we can make it so no little girl receives the message that her voice doesn't matter and that she should give up on her dreams before she's even tried. And in my field, what that'll mean is better movie and television reviews, better shows, and eventually a more just and equitable world. Who's with me? Thank you.